Let's go back to the epistemological aspects of the English grammar. So epistemology is the science of what we know or what the humans could possibly know. In fact, it's not so obvious to decide whether we know something or not. And people think that this is obvious. You know that you exist because I can touch you. You know that you exist because you can speak, I can see you. You are living. There are a lot of facts that prove that you are living or no. These things are not enough. We don't know exactly what are the conditions, the necessary and sufficient conditions to decide whether something exists or not. There's no rule for that. It's kind of impactful to think about this, but there's no rule for that. We should consider a lot of things. Can we only know real things? What is the extent of our knowledge? Do we always need to experience to know or deduce something? Is induction a proper knowledge? If you guys don't remember, what's the difference between deduction and induction? Well, deduction, you would have to reach to a conclusion, making a mix or a relationship between or among some premises. Like, for example, uh, every man is mortal. I am a man, then I am mortal. And induction would be a kind of prediction to deduce a lot of things because a lot of previous things are in the same way. Like, for example, I've seen a lot of men dying, so probably all the men die. But actually, this difference not so clear because you can see a bit of deduction inside the induction and vice versa. So I don't know why these people bother themselves so much in making these differences, but let's just continue. Are there really necessary properties in an object or they are just contingent or accidental? Despite of the fact that these questions are still in debate in philosophy, we had to decide partial solutions to them in order to make our English grammar. So let's take a look on some considerations about this. For example, we know that music could be considered uh, kind of evolution of the speech, right? When music impacts us for the first time, we feel that it speaks to us beyond the words spoken and the lyrics. So the the language of the music is not limited to the things that people are saying. Of course, nowadays I just listen to instrumental music. The composition of the instruments say a lot of things too. I also have a work talking about this. We have something in this paper too, but we'll not enter in this debate right now. The instruments used in the instruments used in the way of singing, even silence, assume sound patterns that are analogous to some natural attitudes of human beings, such as the lightness and fluidity of a good natured smile, or the harshness and violence of uncontrolled anger. So it's clear that our emotions can be translated into some instruments manifestations in music, for example. When you use a distorted guitar, for example, it seems that there is a angry man trying to speak something to you. It is clear that with the evolution of the complexity of expression, one comes to act in contrary and ironic ways to the already known natural behaviors. Also, the proportion used in musical notes reveals a movement pattern, allowing us to identify the origin and end of the path. The passage of an octave, for example, you can see cycles like we do in language. When you know that I have started a phrase, that I am in the middle of a phrase, and when, of course, I'm finishing a phrase. I always put some notes, some tones in my voice, and all these things are relevant to make you understand things. These are the sounds of onomatopoeias, like for example, knee, blade, hoot, crash, tinkle. Are nouns whose names came from the imitation of the sounds they name. Cuckoo, although it imitates the sound made by the bird, denotes the bird and not the sound itself. Cuckoo is the name of the bird because the bird makes this sound. It is said that these names could not have been written in another language or any other way, or in a very different way, since the sounds are the same in any language. So, for example, the sound of the bird is the same one for everyone. But of course, we know that every language has their own way to listen to things. So, of course, in Portuguese, we would never characterize a bird like this, a cuckoo, right? But in the English language, people do like this. That is, it was believed, therefore, that onomatopoeias were the origin of vocabulary. That's a good theory, right? Nothing safer than start imitating the sounds of things that are themselves by nature, like the sounds of the animals, the sounds of the water, of the fire, things that we don't have control of. Other verbs or what other verb examples are I'm going to slash you, slash. Or they have been blasted. These onomatopoeias are very interesting. We can actually extract names only trying to imitate their sounds. Probably they were the origin of the vocabulary. The dispute between analogists and anomalists was the same between, respectively, the conventionalists, who believe that language is a human product, and the naturalists, that language is fixed and prior to man. So what do you think? Do you think that the language had existed before man, or this is our creation? The onomatopoeias, while fixed and common from nature, would explain why we have irregular words like child that goes to children in the plural. Because it wouldn't help just inventing names if there are fixed sounds to be imitated. So why in the hell would I invent names if I can start my vocabulary imitating the sounds of the nature? Right? This is something much more natural. There is, therefore, an attempt to standardize language, but the influence of some aspects of reality that preceded us is inevitable, and we need to describe, of course, the way we see or hear them. So, this is a natural path to follow, right? Synonyms and homonyms also reveal the arbitrary and subjective character of humanity, because in the end, impressions cannot be the same for everyone. Would that be another metaphysical statement? I'm talking about metaphysics again. Of course, metaphysics is the basis for every knowledge. So if I'm talking about epistemology, it would be very natural to talk about metaphysics too. So the impressions cannot be the same for everyone. Like if there are different perspectives, if I exist, if you exist, if she exists, and everyone has their own perspective about the things, which is something that we cannot prove, by the way. We cannot prove the existence of the other minds. And nothing impedes us to be dealing with robots, with simulations, with people that act like us, but only me, for example, only me have a perspective to see the world. The philosopher must decide between the natural and the conventional, though making possible a science of philosophy, as stated above. Like we've talked, what people do in university is the science of philosophy, not philosophy itself, because they assume things. The notion of deixis, which is merely the Greek word for pointing or indicating, it has become a technical term of grammatical theory, is introduced to handle the orientational features of language. The so called personal pronouns, I, you, he, etc., constitute only one class of the elements in language whose meaning is to be stated with reference to date coordinates or the typical situation of utterance. So other elements are here and there and now and then. Like for example, we are talking about deixis, the names that don't have meaning by themselves, like tomorrow, here, you. It depends on the context that you are using this. This is the first attempt to initialize and standardize what we know nowadays as pragmatics, the meaning of the words and expressions in a context. It's interesting to notice that words like I or there are semantically empty as long as they don't make reference to any particular object out of the context of the utterance. Are we talking about the same problem that Bertrand Russell brought in his On the Noting? About the reference to nothing? Like saying now and nowadays, the current king of France is bald, although we don't have currently any king in France. What happens to these dictic terms while they are not making any circumstantial reference? Or on that situation, are they making reference to something but we just don't know? Are they just labels as proper names are to Stuart Mill? Because there is this deep debate, although once again I think that this is quite empty, that they don't know whether the proper names are just labels. Like, I have the label John and waiting for someone to be called John. But what is this label doing while it doesn't name anything? Is it even possible for this label to be somewhere without naming anything whatsoever? I don't think so. These are questions that, although apparently unsolvable, were decisive to compose the concept of deixis itself. So sometimes to be mysterious is an intrinsic property of a useful thing. 3. There is a contingency involved in the morphology of the words. Given arbitrariness of language, that is, the fact that words, more precisely morphemes, meaningful linguistic units that compound words such as shoes. Shoes is a one-syllable word and the s indicates plural of the substantive, are theoretically chosen without any particular justification. In fact, it is remarkable that no science, let alone language, would allow such an indiscriminate facet. And so there are indeed some good reasons for the form and sound of existing words, like we've seen above. We have started imitating the sounds of the nature, which are supposed to be fixed and like they are by definition. It's easy to start a science or to start a dictionary when we are receiving the informations from the nature already. Initially, the onomatopoeia would be the main reason for naming something in a given language, as said before. But it was soon seen that most objects in the world do not produce sound, contrary to the sounds imitated by the verbs blast, crush, crack, break, fast, flash, etc. There would also be an attempt to describe the shape of the object in equivalent sounds, such as round, conveying the idea that the mouth performs a cycle to say this. Take a look. Round. So we have created this sound, actually this movement, to imitate the sound, but there's no sound for round, right? But I'm making a circle with my mouth, round. So that would be a second good reason to create a word like this is nowadays in this contingent word. Or blank. Blank. Representing the speed of movement by the speed of the utterance, as fast as the blink of an eye. Blank. It has to be a fast word to represent a fast movement. Blank. Blank. In fact, phonetics is still the main law. It is useless to think of unpronounceable sounds for morphemes composed then of phonemes manageable by the organ of the language, the tongue, which could not be few, less than 10, or many, more than 70. Or it would be impossible to learn. So we have to consider our human lifetime. We could not create a language that would take so long to speak just an idea, for example. I want to say house. Imagine that I have created a language that to say house I would take like 2 years to say. It wouldn't be a good thing, right? So all of these limitations were important to decide the grammar, the dictionary, and some other contingent things in our language. They are related to our limitations, to our physical and mental limitations, which could not be few, no, or less than 10. It would be so few options to create something useful, but it cannot be so high, this number, because we would have a lot of information to deal with, and we would never make a functional language for us. In addition to words that are poorly heard or read, passed down through generations, and words borrowed from other languages, the emergence of new words occurs through syntagmatic relationships in a horizontal order of the letters, based on a focal word that serves as a paradigm for other words like pat, bat, mat, lat. The phonemes P, B, M, L. These are the phonemes of the consonants, would be in contrast to each other as producers of new words. So take a look. We always have an E inside the 3-letter word, right? But you can put the consonants at the beginning to make some new words. So these standards were necessary to create a functional language too. The linguist must therefore define a matrix of combinations between phonemes of regular words already used, so that such a rule allows not only the deduction of such real words, but also potential ones. Thus, we have a list of words for the future without having to invent something absurd or without rules. We can literally make a literal prediction of the dictionary's future. So if you think that I can create words in English in a random way, you are mistaken, right? You cannot do this in any language, neither in Portuguese, neither in the English language, neither in German, French, because their dictionary have been created according to some syntagmatic relationships, for example, and some other things that we have discussed before, right? We can make a theory about the future words that we can have in a given language. 4. What about conditionals? This is already an ancient study since Aristotle and his first formalizations of thinking when he talked about syllogism. If every man is mortal and John is a man, then John's mortal. But these are a categorical type of conditional, and nowadays we call these zero conditional. The zero conditional is when you talk in present indicative in the first clause and the second clause, because you are talking about a law, a deduction, something that doesn't change. The zero conditional presupposes that the speaker is talking about a kind of law. either natural or artificial. And we have to use the structure simple present tense, both in indicative verb mood. This is important, right? Because indicative means that you are speaking in conviction. So if you are talking about a law, you know what you're talking about. You have to speak this convictedly. So this conditional is about a prescription. If X happens, you have to put this S to indicate the indicative. Then Y happens. So if it rains on me, then I get wet. If it rains on me, then she gets wet. Formally, if X, then Y. Like this. This means that one is so certain of the outcomings of X that one describes the situation like one were seeing this already happening in front of their eyes, right? But this is not necessarily the case. Epistemologically speaking, one is sure or almost sure of the cause-effect relationship of this particular condition. We have the first conditional too. This is the most common condition because it represents an almost total responsibility of the speaker, and we have to use the structure simple present tense, subjunctive, simple future tense. If it rain, then I will stay home. Almost no one knows about this, but you cannot use rains here because you're not speaking in the indicative. We have the third person singular, but this is not indicative. This is subjunctive because you are making a prediction. You don't actually know what will happen if it rains. That's why you have to put this in simple future because you are trying to predict. This is not a law. Maybe you can be mistaken in the future. Please note that there is no S at the end of the word rain because there's no sense in making a conditional in the indicative mode outside the zero condition. Yes, I know that the word software doesn't like it either. So, although I've had the problem above, the correction system has put a correction in the mistake that I've done by purpose. This time, the word software didn't try to boycott me. Here, I don't have the S. So this is the correct form. I'm using third person singular subjunctive in the present. It's easy to see that the speaker in deciding what is going to happen as an effect of raining. And this is the reason why one is expressing one's willingness using the modal verb will. Epistemologically speaking, although one is not sure of what will really happen, one shows at least some kind of intention towards the future, and this is considered a weak prediction. A weak prediction. You're just trying to predict, right? We could talk about the second conditional. This is used to imagine a different and maybe possible situation, and is characterized by the form simple past plus would. Actually, every modal that ends with LD, could, should, plus verb. So if I were a millionaire, I would be bored nowadays. In this case, the speaker might have some hope, and that's why he or she has imagined a different reality from his or her own. The future past character of the modal would reveals that a certain future has been interfered by a certain past. This is what we call the function of the future past. It's a future that receives influence from the past. Epistemologically speaking, one is making a hypothesis of what could have happened in one's life given a possible, though improbable, situation. The last one is the third condition. This is about fatality. One doesn't have any more hopes for a change of reality, but this is not enough to avoid one to reimagine one's own past. Yes, you can reimagine. You won't change it as long as we consider that physics has this law that you cannot go backwards in time. The general form of this conditional is past perfect, would have, past participle. If I had had more patience, I would have had were friends. Past perfect, it would have plus a participle. Epistemologically speaking, this is a reality that cannot be known because it is impossible to happen. Consider that time cannot be rewinded, but it represents a reimagination of a given situation. So, all these rules about conditionals are related to some of our epistemological knowledge. You know, for each one of them, of course, that we could have some other kinds of conditionals, but these four in English grammar, they are based on our own epistemological ideas of what we can know about this world. So yeah, there is the prediction, there is that past that we cannot change, there is the hypothesis, of course, there is the law. So all these things are related to things that we can know and how we can know about these things in this world. So if we didn't have these epistemological rules, we wouldn't have these specific English grammar rules. This is very interesting, right? Well, we continue the fifth topic afterwards. So hope to see you guys there. Bye bye.